Wife turned my entire family against me, and kept my daughter away for years after our divorce. Now she reached me as an adult, and I told her the real story about her mother. This story is one I never thought I would share publicly. But after everything that has happened, I need to get it off my chest. The past few weeks have been nothing short of a roller coaster. Maybe someone out there can help me understand if I'm truly the bad guy in all this. I, 48 meters, have been through a whirlwind of emotions and events over the past decade, and it's all come to a head in a way I never expected. It all started many years ago when I married Laura, the mother of my daughter Emily. Laura and I were high school sweethearts, and at first our love seemed unbreakable. We were young, full of dreams, and ready to take on the world together. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest bonds, and it wasn't long before the cracks in our relationship began to show. Laura came from a well-off family accustomed to a life of luxury, while I grew up in a more modest household. Despite our differences, I loved her deeply, and tried my best to provide for her in the way she was used to. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. The pressures of trying to keep up with Laura's expectations weighed heavily on me, and our marriage began to suffer. Our relationship became increasingly strained, and the arguments became more frequent. I noticed that Laura seemed distant, as if her mind was elsewhere. I tried to reach out to understand what was wrong, but she always brushed me off, claiming that everything was fine. It was only later, during the divorce proceedings, that I learned the heartbreaking truth. Laura had been unfaithful to me multiple times throughout our marriage. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All those nights I spent working late to provide for our family, all the sacrifices I made to keep our marriage afloat, and she had been betraying me all along. Despite the pain and betrayal, my top priority was our daughter Emily. She was just 11 years old at the time, and I wanted to do everything in my power to be there for her. But that hope also shattered during the divorce settlement. Laura was determined to paint me as the villain in our story. She accused me of being emotionally distant and neglectful, and even hinted at potential abuse, none of which was true, but Laura was convincing. And she managed to turn my own family against me, including my parents and siblings. They all bought into her story, believing that I must have done something terrible to drive her to infidelity. It felt like I was stranded on an island, with no one willing to hear me out. The court battle was brutal, and despite my best efforts, the judge sided with Laura. She was awarded full custody of Emily, and I was granted limited visitation rights. But even those few opportunities to see my daughter were sabotaged by Laura. She would often forget about scheduled visits, or claim that Emily was sick or had other plans. I would offer to take Emily to school or help her with projects, but Laura refused to let me play any meaningful role in her life. My family, who had always been close to Emily, sided with Laura and helped her keep my daughter away from me. They were also determined to erase me from Emily's life, and I was powerless to stop it. The years that followed were some of the most painful of my life. It started subtly at first. Emily would be hesitant to visit me, preferring to stay with her mom. And while it hurt, I tried to understand. After all, kids often prefer one parent over the other, right? But soon it became clear that something more malicious was at play. Emily would come to our visits with a list of grievances, things I supposedly did or said that painted me as the bad guy. I was confused because none of it was true. When I tried to talk to Laura about it, she would dismiss my concerns or twist the conversation to make it seem like I was just being paranoid or overreacting. Over the years, I tried to maintain a relationship with Emily, but it became increasingly difficult. Phone calls went unanswered, letters were returned unopened, and my attempts to see her were met with hostility from Laura and my family. Let's just say that they all seemed determined to erase me from Emily's life. The worst part came when Emily was around 13. She told me outright that she didn't want to see me anymore. She said it so coldly, as if I meant nothing to her. I was devastated. I knew that Laura had been feeding her lies, but I didn't have the heart to drag Emily through a messy legal battle. After all, she did want to stay with her mom, and if at that point I pulled her away from her mother, it would just make matters worse. I didn't want to be the cause of more conflict in her life, so I reluctantly agreed to step back. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. I kept hoping that one day she'd realize the truth and come back to me, but that day didn't come for a long time. Years later, I slowly but steadily moved on from that dramatic period of my life. I met Megan, and there was an instant spark between us. But because of my past experiences, we took our time to get to know each other, and then got married some time ago. Megan had the kids of her own, so most of my time was spent with them, and we built a life together. While I loved my new family, there was always a part of me that wondered about Emily. How was she doing? What had she become? I reached out to Laura a few times over the years to ask about Emily, but she never replied. I tried to convince myself that Emily was better off without me, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I had abandoned her. And then one day out of the blue, Emily reached out to me. She was 20 years old now. And her message was short and simple. She wanted to meet and talk. She said there were things she needed to understand about our family, about why I wasn't there for her. My heart skipped a beat when I read her message. The thought of seeing her after all this time was scary, but I was not going to miss a chance to see my daughter. I was nervous but also hopeful. Maybe this was the moment I've been waiting for all these years. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. I was a bundle of nerves as I waited for her to arrive. When she finally walked in, I hardly recognized her. She had grown into a beautiful young woman. But the anger and hurt in her eyes were unmistakable. It was clear that she had been carrying a lot of pain for a long time. And as we sat down across from each other, the tension was palpable. Emily didn't waste any time getting to the point. She wanted answers. Answers that I knew would be hard to hear. I took a deep breath and began to tell her the truth. I didn't hold back. I told her everything. How her mother and her family had systematically poisoned her against me, how they had twisted every situation to make me look like the bad guy, and how I had tried so hard to be a part of her life, despite everything I told her about Laura's infidelities, and the lies she had spread during the divorce. For the next few hours, I laid out the reality of what had happened. I had brought with me old court documents, text messages and emails that supported my story. I wanted Emily to know that I understood what she had been told about me this whole time, and I wasn't the monster she had been led to believe. Emily sat in stunned silence as I revealed the reality of what had happened. She had grown up believing that I was the one who had walked away, that I hadn't cared enough to be part of her life. Learning the truth was overwhelming for her. I could see her processing everything, and I didn't push her to respond. I knew this was a lot for her to take in. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling. She asked me why I never fought back, why I didn't try harder to stay in her life. That question broke me. I had to explain that I didn't want to put her in the middle of a legal battle, and that I thought stepping back was the best way to protect her. I wanted her to have a happy childhood, even if it meant she would hate me for a while. But the truth was, I regretted not fighting harder. I regretted letting Laura and her family control the narrative. And now it seemed that Emily was beginning to understand the depth of what had happened. She was furious a little at me, but mostly at her mother. She couldn't believe the lengths Laura had gone to just to make herself look like the better parent. Emily decided that she needed to take action. She said she wanted to confront her mother and lay everything out for everyone. I was shocked, but also proud of her for standing up for herself. Emily wasn't the little girl I had known a decade ago. She was a strong woman capable of defending herself. At the same time, I was worried about the toll this would take on her. I took a sigh of relief when she said that she wasn't sure how to move forward with our relationship, as she had gotten so used to an absent father, but she would love it if we could meet and chat more. 2 days later, I received a flurry of angry calls and messages from Laura. Apparently Emily had confronted her with the information I had shared. Laura was furious, accusing me of turning Emily against her and destroying their relationship. What I didn't expect was Emily's next move. She called me yesterday to inform me that she's planning to take Laura to court for parental alienation. She wants to sue for the emotional damage caused by years of lies and manipulation. Now Laura won't stop calling me. She's alternating between threats and pleas, demanding that I talk Emily out of the lawsuit. My family is also reaching out, suddenly wanting to reconnect and smooth things over. I'm at a loss. On one hand, I'm relieved that Emily finally knows the truth. On the other hand, I never intended for things to escalate to this point. At this point in my life, along with Emily, I also have Megan and kids to take care of, and I'm not sure if I can take the same mental pressure again. I don't want to cause more pain or drama, but I also feel that Laura and my family need to face the consequences of their actions. In short, I've been very conflicted. I am proud of Emily for seeking the truth and for wanting to take a stand against what had been done to her, but I was also scared for her. The legal process is brutal, especially when it involves family, and I didn't want her to get hurt more than she already had been. I tried to support her from a distance, giving her the space to make her own decisions, while letting her know that I was there for her whenever she needed me. And I cannot even describe the emotional pressure that I am facing from Laura and my family. All of this is making me question if Ida for telling my daughter the truth about her mother and our past, even though it's led to this complicated situation. Your comments and suggestions would be really helpful. Update 1. Hey guys. Things have taken a turn for the worse, which was honestly very expected. Expected because any confrontation with Laura couldn't be an easy one, because she had zero regard for anyone around her. I just didn't know if it also included our daughter. After Emily's altercation with her mother, she came to our place, her eyes red from crying. This time she didn't hold back. She laid everything out, every painful detail of what her life had been like over the past 8 years. Laura may have won custody, But it was clear that she had no idea how to be a mother, let alone care for a child. Emily described how half of the time Laura wasn't even home. She'd be out sometimes for days on end, leaving Emily alone to fend for herself. The other half of the time when Laura was home, she was drunk and erratic. Emily spoke of the nights when Laura would come home in a rage, throwing things, yelling, and sometimes even blaming Emily for her own failures and frustrations. My heart broke as she recounted these moments. The fear she must have felt, the loneliness, but the worst was yet to come. Emily told us about incidents that still haunted her. The first time she was 13 and Laura had left her alone for the weekend. Without any food or money, Emily tried to cook something for herself, but she ended up burning her hand severely. She was in so much pain, but when she tried calling Laura, she didn't pick up, so Emily, just a child, had to walk to the nearest hospital, her hand wrapped in a towel. She waited for hours in the alone, scared and in pain, until a nurse finally noticed her and helped her. Emily showed me the scar on her hand, a permanent reminder of her mother's neglect. The second time was even worse. She was 15 and Laura had been on a drinking binge for weeks. Emily tried to avoid her as much as possible, but one night Laura got violent. She threw a glass at Emily in a fit of rage, and it shattered against her leg, cutting her deeply. Emily was bleeding and in shock. But instead of helping her, Laura screamed at her to clean up the mess. Emily, terrified, wrapped her leg in an old shirt, and once again made her way to the hospital, where she ended up needing stitches. As Emily recounted these stories, I felt a mix of anger and sorrow that I hadn't felt in years. Anger at Laura for putting our daughter through this nightmare, and sorrow for all the pain Emily had endured. She was just a kid and she didn't deserve any of this. She didn't deserve to be left alone, injured and scared. She didn't deserve to be treated like a burden by the one person who was supposed to protect her. This was literally a case of physical and mental abuse. I found it ironic that the thing she accused me of, to take away my daughter from me, became one of her everyday habits. And all of this could have been avoided if Laura had just let me take care of my daughter. If she hadn't been so consumed by her own selfishness. In spite, Emily could have had a normal, happy childhood. Megan and I spent the whole night listening to Emily. We made sure she felt at home, that she knew she was safe now. Megan was especially comforting, holding Emily's hand and reassuring her that none of this was her fault. I could see how much it meant to Emily to have someone to comfort her, to tell her that she was loved and that she mattered. Then, in a moment that was both heartbreaking and bittersweet, Emily apologized to me. She didn't need to. She had nothing to apologize for, but she did. She said she was sorry for believing all the lies her mother had told her, for pushing me away, for not seeing the truth sooner. Her voice cracked as she told me that she had missed me so much all these years, that she had often wondered what life would have been like if she had lived with me instead. I told her how much I had missed her too, how I had never stopped thinking about her, never stopped loving her. And she did not need to apologize to me about anything, because she was just a victim in Laura's games. It was a bittersweet moment, because while it was painful to hear her apologies, it also meant that we were finally reconnecting after all these years of being apart. This was also a realization for me, that I was done playing safe and avoiding family drama. My daughter's well-being was at stake here, and I was going to get the apology and reparation that she deserved, even if that meant getting into a legal battle with my ex-wife. The next morning, after a long night of talking and comforting, Emily and I cooked up a plan. We were going to confront my family about everything, every lie, every act of neglect, everything that Emily had been put through. I was done with them pretending like they were the perfect family, while they had enabled Laura to destroy Emily's childhood. We had the proof we needed. The hospital records, the text messages, and even some old voicemails from Laura that Emily had saved. It was time to expose the truth, to let them know exactly what their complicity had cost. I could see that Emily was nervous, but there was also a resolve in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She was ready to face them, to stand up for herself, and I was going to be right there beside her. We were finally going to get the justice we both deserved, and I knew that no matter what happened, we would face it together. Whatever happens, you guys will be the first to know. Thank you for understanding my situation and sending helpful comments. Means a lot. I'll be back with updates, cause this is definitely not the end. Update to hello people. Hope you all are doing great. Remember about the family confrontation that Emily and I had planned? Well, that happened and it was definitely eventful. My daughter and I decided to pay a surprise visit, and the moment we walked through the door, I could see the surprise on their faces. It was as if they couldn't quite process the sight of us together, united after all these years. They had never expected this, never anticipated that the years of distance, manipulation, and lies could be undone so swiftly. But here we were standing side by side, ready to confront them. The initial shock wore off quickly. and they scrambled to put on their usual facade of concern. My mother was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false worrying, as she asked Emily if I had hurt her or done something to upset her. The insinuation stung not because I cared what they thought of me, but because it showed just how deeply they had bought into Laura's narrative. To think that I would harm my own daughter, it was a sickening thought, but one they seemed to hold without question. They were quick to believe the worst of me, perhaps because it made it easier for them to justify their own actions. But I wasn't Laura, and Emily was no longer the scared, confused child they once knew. Before I could respond, Emily stepped forward. Her voice was steady, filled with a quiet strength that made me proud. She told them to drop the act, to stop pretending that they cared, when they had done nothing to help her over the years. There was no hesitation, no wavering in her words. She called them out for their apathy, for standing by while Laura neglected and hurt her, and for being complicit in the destruction of her childhood. I watched as my parents and siblings tried to mask their discomfort. Their expression shifted from feigned concern to something closer to annoyance. They didn't like being confronted, especially not by Emily, who they still saw as a child, someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they had thrown her way. But Emily wasn't a child anymore, and she wasn't interested in their hollow apologies or excuses. I saw some comments asking, how did Laura set my own family against me so easily? Well, our relationship had always been complicated, tangled in years of unresolved issues and varied resentment. My siblings and I have never been close. There was always a sense of competition, of one-upmanship that poisoned any chance of a genuine bond. My parents, instead of fostering unity, had taken sides, aligning themselves with whichever child was most useful to them. At the time when Laura had come to them with the idea of divorcing me, they saw it as an opportunity, a way to channel their lingering resentment towards me. They hadn't cared about the impact it would have on Emily or me. They were more interested in settling old scores, in seeing me brought down a peg. As Emily laid out everything that had happened, how Laura had abandoned her, how she had suffered injuries and trauma while they turned a blind eye, I could see the discomfort growing on their faces. They weren't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone they had underestimated for so long. And it wasn't just the words that stung. It was the fact that Emily was holding them accountable, refusing to let them off the hook with their usual platitudes. Of course, we didn't reveal everything we had. There was no need to show all our cards at once. We had hospital records, text messages, and other evidence that could easily tear apart their carefully constructed narrative. But for now we kept most of it close, only revealing enough to make it clear that we were serious, that this wasn't just some emotional outburst. This was a warning, a declaration that we were done playing by their rules, and things were about to get a whole lot more serious. We left the house without waiting for any response. There was nothing they could say that would change anything, nothing that would undo the years of pain and neglect they had allowed to happen. As we walked away, Emily delivered one final message. She told them to pass it on to Laura, to let her know that we were coming with a very hefty case, and that she'd better be ready for it. The silence that followed us as we left was deafening, but it was a silence filled with unspoken words, with the weight of what was to come. Emily and I had drawn our line in the sand, and there was no turning back. The family had always thrived on division, on keeping us isolated and at odds with each other, but now with Emily and me standing together, they were the ones who were going to have to face the consequences. All of you have given me some of the best advice, and know that I'm constantly going through each and every comment. Your support means a lot. Update 3. Hello. I want to thank everyone who has followed this story and offered support and advice. The past few days have been some of the most challenging of my life, but I think we're finally seeing a way forward. So buckle up for a lengthy one. After the incident at my family's place, I immediately contacted one of our lawyers. I wasn't about to let Laura get away with everything she had done. Not just to me, but to Emily as well. But when I brought up the idea of pursuing legal action, Emily surprised me. She didn't want to move forward with any legalities. It wasn't that she didn't care, or that she was forgiving her mother. Far from it. Emily had just been through so much, and she had other priorities now. Her academic life was thriving, and she had big plans for her future. She couldn't afford to put that on hold to sue her mom and fight a court case. As her dad, I was so proud of her. After everything she had endured, she was still such a smart, resilient young woman with great career prospects ahead of her. But I also couldn't help but feel conflicted. A part of me wanted Laura to suffer for her actions, to face the consequences of the pain she had caused. It was one thing to mess up my life, but to harm Emily, to rob her of a normal, happy childhood, that was something I found unforgivable. However, I respected Emily's wishes. Unlike at her mom's, her opinion mattered here. And that was something I would always keep in mind when making decisions as we were navigating through all of this. Something else also happened. A day or two later, one of Laura's neighbors showed up at our doorstep with an envelope. The neighbor explained that Laura was leaving town for a while, and asked her to deliver the envelope to us. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I took the envelope and thanked the neighbor. Inside the envelope was a letter from Laura. It was long, filled with apologies and explanations, attempts to justify her actions. She wrote about how she became very alone after I left, how she lost her job, and how things spiraled downhill from there. She eventually found another job, but it paid poorly and she sank deeper into depression. Drinking became her way of coping, and she claimed that she never meant to hurt Emily, that she was just so lost and overwhelmed by her own misery. Laura went on to detail more of her struggles, trying to paint a picture of a woman pushed to the brink by circumstances beyond her control. But as I read, all I could think was how hollow it all sounded. It was clear that Laura was trying to excuse her behavior, to make it seem like she was a victim of her own life. But no amount of hardship could justify the way she had treated Emily. She ended the letter by begging us not to pursue a legal battle. She promised to stay away from Emily as a gesture of goodwill, and offered to pay whatever amount we thought was right, as reparation for the damage she had caused. When I handed the letter to Emily, I could see the heartbreak in her eyes as she read it. This wasn't the apology she had wanted, and it certainly wasn't the resolution she deserved. What kind of mother leaves her child like this, and then thinks that money could somehow make up for all the years of pain and neglect? It was a crushing realization for Emily, and I knew she needed time to process everything. I gave Emily space, understanding she'd reach out to Megan, or me, when she was ready. My wife Megan had quickly become a source of comfort for Emily, someone she could confide in without judgment. Emily soon became like family to all of us, forming a close bond with Megan's children. While I wanted to help, I realized Emily benefited more from Megan's support and perspective. To process everything after a while, Emily came to me with her decision. She didn't want to pursue a legal case. She didn't want to drag this out any longer, or get bogged down in a bitter court battle. She wanted to start fresh, to focus on herself and her future, free from the shadows of the past. Emily was ready to move on, and as much as I wanted justice for her, I knew that this was the right choice. She had spent enough time living under the weight of her mother's mistakes. It was time for her to live her life on her own terms. Emily's decision marked the beginning of a new chapter for us. She started focusing more on her studies, channeling her energy into her goals and aspirations. Megan and I continued to support her in every way we could, offering guidance and encouragement as she navigated this new phase of her life. As for me, this feels like a dream. I have 3 kids and an amazing wife by my side, and things couldn't have ended on a better note. The journey had been long and painful, but in the end we had found our way back to each other. And that, more than anything, was the true victory in all of this. Thank you all again for your support. It's been a wild ride, but I think we're finally on a path towards healing. Bye.